I saved $160,000 by firing her. The new CEO laughed on his first day. He said it loud enough for the glass walls to carry. He was talking about me. My name is Amy, and I'd been with the company for 13 years. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I tapped my phone once and hit send. 10 minutes later, the lawyer ran in shouting, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The firing happened at 9:12 a.m. on a Monday, which already told me everything I needed to know about the man who ordered it. Mondays are for control plays, for optics, for statements. I was called into conference room B, renamed something idiotic like the launch pad, where the new CEO, Mark Ellison, was waiting with HR. Mark had been in the job exactly 4 hours. He still smelled like airport cologne and confidence borrowed from a PowerPoint deck. "Amy," he said, smiling like this was a coffee chat. "We're restructuring leadership costs." Leadership costs. That was me. Director of Operations. 13 years of fixing messes quietly so other people could take credit loudly. HR slid a folder toward me. No severance, no transition. Just a termination notice and a line to sign. "We're saving about $160 annually with this move," Mark added, proud of himself. "Lean and agile." I looked at the document, then at him. "Effective immediately?" I asked. "Effective immediately," he confirmed. I signed. One clean stroke, no hesitation. That part surprised them. Security walked me back to my desk like I might steal a stapler. I packed exactly what I came with. My notebook, my charger, a framed photo of my sister's dog. I didn't touch the company laptop. Didn't need to. As I stood up, I heard laughter through the glass walls of the executive bullpen. Mark's voice carried. "First day win," he said. "Saved the company $160,000 already." Someone clapped. I walked out without turning around. In the elevator, I pulled out my phone and opened a draft I'd written years earlier and never thought I'd use. 3 lines, 1 attachment. Pre-addressed. Recipient, external counsel, regulatory and contractual oversight. Subject, notice of termination, contract. Section 14.2, I hit send as the elevator hit the lobby. Here's what Mark didn't know. I wasn't just leadership cost. I was the contract holder. 13 years ago, when the company was smaller and scrappier and desperate for someone to keep operations compliant across 3 jurisdictions, I negotiated my employment agreement myself. Not for money, for authority. Section 14.2, buried, dry, legal. It stated that in the event of involuntary termination without cause, all operational authorizations, vendor signatory rights, and regulatory representations held by me would immediately suspend pending reassignment approved by external counsel. External, not internal. The clause existed because back then, I was the only one certified to interface directly with 2 regulatory bodies and 7 Tier 1 vendors. The board agreed. Legal agreed. Then everyone forgot. Because nothing ever went wrong. Until now. At 9:22 a.m., Mark was still celebrating. At 9:28 a.m., procurement tried to release a routine payment to a logistics partner and got an error. Unauthorized signatory. At 9:31 a.m., compliance flagged an automated hold on 2 regional operations pending verification of authorized oversight. At 9:34 a.m., someone in finance noticed that 3 vendor portals had locked the company out entirely. And at 9:38 a.m., the company's external lawyer, who had personally signed off on my contract years earlier, opened my email. I was already halfway home when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I ignored it. Another buzz. Then another. I stopped at a red light and checked the time. 9:41 a.m. That's when the lawyer arrived. I didn't see it, obviously, but I heard about it later. How he burst into the executive bullpen, tie crooked, voice raised. "Why the hell did you fire her?" he shouted. Mark laughed at first. "Relax, she was redundant." The lawyer didn't laugh back. "Haven't you read the contract?" Silence. Apparently, Mark pulled up my file right there, scrolling for the first time. When he reached section 14.2, the color drained from his face. Because saving $160,000 is easy. Replacing the person who legally holds your entire operation together? That's a different math problem. And Mark had just failed it on his first day. By the time I got home, the unraveling had already begun. I dropped my keys into the bowl by the door, kicked off my shoes, and made coffee like it was any other weekday. That mattered. Routine keeps your head clear when other people are losing theirs. I didn't pace. I didn't refresh my inbox. I let the system do what systems always do when you remove a load-bearing piece. Strain quietly before they crack loudly. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Jenna in operations. Did something happen? Vendor releases are frozen. I didn't respond. Another message followed, this time from Aaron in finance. External counsel is reviewing authorization chains. Do you know why? Still nothing from me. The contract had been explicit. Once I was terminated, my authority didn't pass automatically to the next person in line. It suspended. That suspension triggered a review process controlled entirely by external counsel, not internal leadership. Every operational approval tied to my name. Payments, compliance sign-offs, vendor certifications, paused until formally reassigned. No internal override, no emergency switch. That structure had been agreed to years ago to protect the company from regulatory risk. It assumed leadership would never be careless enough to fire the person holding those responsibilities without a transition plan. Apparently, assumptions were expensive. I finally opened my email and saw dozens of unread messages piling up. Most were internal, flagged urgent, escalating in tone. One stood out immediately. From external counsel subject, confirmation, section 14.2, triggered. The message was short and professional. They confirmed my termination notice had been received. They confirmed section 14.2 was active. All authorizations associated with my role were officially suspended pending reassignment. They asked whether I intended to contest the termination or remain disengaged. I replied with a single sentence. I do not intend to contest. Please proceed per the agreement. No commentary. No emotion. Back at the office, confusion had turned into friction. Procurement couldn't release payments beyond a basic threshold. Two major logistics partners paused shipments automatically once approvals failed. One of those shipments was tied to a client project already under scrutiny. Compliance systems flagged it immediately. When authorization chains suspend, software doesn't care about intent. It reacts to conditions. Dashboards changed color. Alerts stacked. People started realizing that this wasn't a glitch. It was structural. Mark tried to handle it the way inexperienced executives often do, by assuming authority could simply be reassigned verbally. He asked a department head to sign off on stalled approvals. She couldn't. Her credentials didn't cover enterprise-level authorization. He asked legal if they could temporarily bypass the requirement. They couldn't. External counsel had jurisdiction. He asked HR what the process was. HR suggested contacting me. That was the first time my phone rang with a familiar office number. I let it go to voicemail. By midday, meetings were quietly canceled. People stopped using Slack channels and started walking to each other's desks. That's how you know trouble is real, when whispers replace emails. Jenna texted again. They're asking how long reassignment takes. Reassignment wasn't quick. That was the point. Each authorization tied to my role required documentation, verification, and in some cases, regulator acknowledgement. Even under ideal conditions, it took weeks. Ideal conditions didn't include firing the person who designed the structure. Legal explained this to Mark. Carefully, slowly. He didn't like the answer. I don't understand, he said, according to Jenna. She was just an employee. That was the misunderstanding at the center of all of it. I wasn't just an employee. I was a designated authority. There's a difference, and the law cares about it even when executives don't. As the day dragged on, the board chair joined the conversation. That doesn't happen unless someone mentions exposure. The CFO stopped talking about savings and started talking about penalties. Contractual, regulatory, reputational. Those numbers made $160,000 look like pocket change. Eventually, my phone rang again. This time, it was the lawyer himself. I answered. "Amy," he said, sounding tired. "Mark made a mistake." "That happens," I replied. "He wants to know if you'd be willing to come in and help transition authority." "I don't work there anymore." Silence. "We're trying to limit damage," he said. "I understand, but the agreement doesn't allow informal transitions. You know that." Another pause. "Yes," he said quietly. "I do." When the call ended, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my coffee until it went cold. Not angry, not satisfied, just aware. I hadn't sabotaged anything. I hadn't taken anything with me. I'd simply stepped away, and the structure behaved exactly as designed. Later that afternoon, an internal memo went out freezing all non-essential operations pending review. Mark stopped responding to emails. External counsel formally notified leadership that the company remained operationally restricted until proper reassignment was completed. That was the moment reality finally landed. Firing me hadn't saved them $160,000. It had revealed how much of the company had been standing on my name alone. The next day, I woke up without an alarm for the first time in over a decade. No calendar reminders, no emergency inbox scans. Just quiet. I made breakfast slowly, the kind of slow that only happens when your time is suddenly your own. Eggs, toast, coffee. I ate at the table instead of standing at the counter like I used to between calls. Halfway through my second cup, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a former coworker. It was an email from external counsel, copied to several unfamiliar addresses. Board level unfamiliar. They were requesting a status call. I didn't rush. I replied with my availability for later that afternoon and went about my day. Laundry. A walk. Normal things that feel almost rebellious when your identity has been built around being indispensable. By the time the call happened, the situation had moved past internal inconvenience and into external consequence. The lawyer didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Amy, several clients have formally requested clarification on the company's operational authority," he said. "They're asking who currently holds responsibility for regulatory sign-off." "And what did you tell them?" I asked. "That reassignment is in progress." I let the silence stretch. "That's accurate," I said eventually, "but incomplete." He exhaled. "We're trying to keep this contained." "You can't," I replied. "Containment depends on continuity. You broke that." What Mark had failed to understand, and what legal was now desperately explaining to him, was that authority isn't symbolic. It's relational. Vendors, regulators, and clients don't care who sits in the CEO chair. They care whose name is on the documents they've trusted for years. And my name was suddenly gone. Without an active designated authority, the company couldn't certify compliance on active projects. That didn't automatically shut everything down, but it did something worse. It created uncertainty. And uncertainty is poison in regulated industries. Clients started asking questions. One paused a milestone payment until clarification was provided. Another requested written assurance that oversight hadn't lapsed. A third quietly escalated to their own legal team. Those were the smart ones. Internally, Mark was still trying to reassert control. I heard later that he'd asked whether an interim authority could be temporarily recognized to keep things moving. The answer was no. The structure didn't allow it, because if it did, it wouldn't protect anyone. By midday, the board was fully engaged. Not politely, not passively. Engaged in the way people are when they realize a risk memo they skimmed years ago has finally come due. I got another call from the lawyer. "They're asking if you'd reconsider," he said. "Consulting, short term, just to stabilize." "Under what terms?" I asked. He hesitated. "They haven't finalized anything." "That's a no." I said calmly. If they want to talk, they can come prepared. After we hung up, I opened my laptop for the first time since being fired and checked LinkedIn. Nothing dramatic, just quiet profile views stacking up from people who suddenly remembered my name. I wasn't surprised. When systems wobble, people look for the last person who understood them. Late that afternoon, Mark finally emailed me directly. The subject line read, "Let's talk." The message itself was brief and carefully worded. "Amy, I believe there's been a misunderstanding regarding the transition of your role. I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss a path forward that works for everyone. Works for everyone." I read it twice, then closed my laptop without replying. That phrase told me everything. Mark still thought this was a misunderstanding, a communications issue, something that could be smoothed over with the right tone and a quick meeting. It wasn't. This was the cost of acting before understanding. That evening, Jenna called me. She sounded tired. "They're blaming each other," she said. "Legal says leadership should have reviewed the contract. Leadership says legal should have flagged it. No one's owning the decision." "That sounds familiar," I said. "They asked if you'd come back," she added quietly. "To the same job?" "No," she said. "Some kind of advisor role. Temporary." I pictured Mark sitting at the head of the table, still convinced this was a salvageable optics problem. "No," I said. "But thank you for telling me." After we hung up, I sat on my couch and stared at the ceiling. Not celebrating, not plotting, just letting the truth settle. For 13 years, I'd absorbed pressure so other people didn't have to. I'd caught problems early, fixed them quietly, and moved on without credit. That's what made me invisible. And that invisibility was what Mark mistook for irrelevance. The next morning, the consequences went public. A key client issued a formal notice requesting confirmation of compliance authority within a defined window. Industry forums lit up with speculation. Nothing accusatory, just cautious, curious. That's worse. Because once doubt enters the conversation, reassurance has to work twice as hard. Mark was learning that leadership isn't about decisiveness alone. It's about knowing which decisions you don't get to make casually. And I was learning something too. Walking away hadn't weakened me. It had finally made my role visible. Just not in the building I'd given 13 years to. By the end of the day, external counsel sent one final update to leadership. Without my involvement, reassignment timelines remained uncertain. The company wasn't collapsing, but it was bleeding time. And time, unlike employees, doesn't come back once you fire it. By the end of the week, the company wasn't panicking anymore. It had moved into something worse. Containment mode. That's the phase where leadership stops pretending the problem will disappear and starts quietly trying to keep it from becoming visible to the wrong people. Emails get shorter, meetings get smaller, decisions get made in side rooms with doors closed. I knew because the calls changed. External counsel stopped asking if I would help and started asking how that conversation might happen. The board stopped speaking in hypotheticals and started using phrases like exposure window and downstream impact. Those are phrases you use when the damage is no longer theoretical. One afternoon, I received a formal calendar invite. No fluff, no small talk. Attendees, board chair, external counsel, interim CFO. Subject, operational authority discussion. Mark wasn't on it. That alone told me a lot. The call was tense but professional. No one raised their voice. No one apologized yet either. That comes later, when leverage is clearer. The board chair spoke first. "Amy, thank you for making time." "I have time," I replied. "That's not the issue." He nodded, like he understood more than he was saying. "We're aware the termination decision was rushed." "That's one word for it," I said. The CFO jumped in. "We need to understand what it would take to restore continuity." I leaned back in my chair. Continuity assumes trust. That was broken. Silence again. They explained the situation as if I didn't already know it. Vendor holds, client concern, regulatory scrutiny hovering but not yet landing. The company was still operational, technically, but every day without resolution increased risk. "We're not asking you to return as an employee," the chair said carefully. "We're asking if you'd consider an interim solution." "Under whose authority?" I asked. Another pause. "Yours," he admitted. That was the first honest thing anyone had said. They wanted me to come back as an external authority, temporarily reinstated to stabilize operations while they figured out a long-term reassignment. Consulting, in other words. High responsibility, limited loyalty. "And Mark?" I asked. The chair sighed. "Mark underestimated the role. That's been addressed. He didn't say how. He didn't have to. I didn't give them an answer on that call. I told them I'd review any proposal they sent and respond in writing. After we hung up, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction, not anger, but clarity. For years, I'd been solving problems inside a structure that never really saw me. Now, outside of it, everyone suddenly understood exactly what I did. The proposal arrived the next morning. It was better than the first attempt. Much better. 6-month consulting agreement, full reinstatement of authority for the duration. Clear scope. Direct reporting line to the board, not the CEO. Compensation well above my previous salary. No non-compete beyond standard confidentiality. They needed me badly enough to stop pretending otherwise. But there was still something missing. I replied with comments attached. One clause added. In the event of unilateral termination or interference with authority during the consulting period, all responsibilities would immediately suspend again, without obligation to assist further. No repeat performances. That afternoon, the board approved it. Mark didn't object. Or couldn't. I returned to the building the following Monday, not through the main entrance, but through the side elevator that led directly to executive offices. Different badge, different title, same face. People looked at me differently now. Not warmly, not coldly, carefully. Jenna caught my eye across the hallway and gave a small, relieved smile. Others avoided eye contact entirely. Mark was in his office when I walked past. Door closed, blinds half drawn. The energy had shifted around him. He was still CEO in name, but authority is a fragile thing. Once cracked, it never quite sets the same way. My first meeting was with compliance and legal. No speeches, no theatrics. We mapped the path forward. What could be restored immediately? What would take time? What risks had to be disclosed proactively? This was work I knew. Real work. The kind that doesn't care about egos. By midweek, vendor holds began lifting. Carefully, one by one. Clients were briefed. Some were reassured, others weren't. Trust doesn't come back on a schedule. Mark never spoke to me directly. He didn't have to. His role had quietly narrowed. Decisions rooted around him now, not because anyone announced it, but because systems respond to authority the same way people do. They follow what works. One evening, as I packed up, the board chair stopped me in the hallway. "We should have protected your role better," he said. "Yes," I replied. "You should have." He nodded. No excuses. That was enough. I didn't feel victorious walking out of the building that night. I felt done. Done carrying weight no one acknowledged. Done being invisible until something broke. There was still one chapter left to write. But for the first time since I'd been fired, the outcome wasn't about punishment. It was about deciding what I would no longer tolerate, no matter how much it cost them to learn it. The 6 months passed faster than I expected. Stability returned in layers, not all at once. Vendor authorizations were restored methodically. Compliance flags cleared after audits confirmed continuity. Clients stopped asking pointed questions and went back to asking for timelines and discounts like nothing had ever happened. From the outside, the company looked healed. From the inside, it was changed. Mark remained CEO, but the title no longer carried the weight he thought it did. Decisions that once flowed through his office now routed around it. Through committees, through council, through the board. He still spoke in meetings, still used the right words, still smiled at the right moments. But authority isn't granted by confidence alone. It's granted by trust, and his had been quietly reassigned. We never had a private conversation. Not once. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. And I didn't ask. Some lessons don't need dialogue to land. As my contract neared its end, the board asked if I'd consider extending. This time, the offer was permanent. A revised executive role. More pay, more influence, more protection written into the agreement. I listened. I thanked them. I declined. Not out of spite, not out of pride, out of clarity. I don't want to spend my career being the fail-safe, I told the chair. I want to build something where I'm not invisible until things break. He understood. I could see it in the way he nodded. Not as a negotiator, but as someone finally hearing the truth behind the paperwork. My final week was quiet. I documented everything. Not because they asked, but because that's who I am. I trained 2 people thoroughly, not because I owed the company anything, but because no one deserved to be set up to fail the way I had been dismissed. On my last day, I returned my badge and laptop without ceremony. No farewell email, no speech, just closure. As I walked out, Jenna hugged me. Hard. I'm glad you didn't come back the old way, she said. So am I replied. 2 weeks later, I started my new role. Different company, smaller leadership team, clear governance, and this time my authority wasn't buried in a clause. It was acknowledged out loud. The irony wasn't lost on me. The company that fired me to save $160,000 spent more than that stabilizing the damage. Legal fees, delayed revenue, consultant costs, lost leverage. None of it catastrophic. All of it avoidable. Mark lasted another quarter. Officially, it was a mutual separation. Unofficially, the board had learned the cost of decisiveness without understanding. He landed somewhere else quickly. People like him usually do. I didn't follow his career. I didn't need to. Months later, I ran into the external lawyer at a conference. He smiled when he saw me. You handled that cleanly, he said. I followed the agreement, I replied. He laughed. Most people don't realize contracts are stories. Yours just happened to end well. That stuck with me, because that's what this had been, in the end. Not revenge, not even justice. A story about value, and who gets to define it. For 13 years, my value had been quiet. Measured in systems that didn't fail, audits that passed, crises that never made it to leadership meetings. That kind of value doesn't photograph well. It doesn't fit into a first-day victory speech. But it holds companies together. When Mark fired me, he thought he was cutting a cost. What he actually cut was context. And context, once removed, doesn't announce its absence until something important stops working. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I didn't gloat. I signed a document and stepped away. Everything that followed was simply the structure responding honestly for the first time. Now, when people ask me what happened, I keep it simple. They fired me without understanding my role, I say. So the role stopped existing. That's the part executives forget. You can remove a person. But if you don't understand what they carry, the weight doesn't disappear. It falls.